We had three panelists today. We have Mark Miller, Andy Nicoletti, and John Vaden. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So, Mark, I'll have you go first.
I'm the supervisor of assessments for Marion County. I got elected back in December of 2016, so I've been here going on, 6 years, maybe close to 7. And I also am an instructor for IPAI.
All right, awesome. Thanks. Next, Andy, I'll go ahead and have you introduce yourself.
All right, I'm Andy Nicoletti. I'm from Kendall County. I've been here since 2009. I've actually been in this field since 1991. And I have a CIAOM, which I've had since 2006.
All right, great. And our third panelist is John Vaden.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Vaden. I am the assessor at Harlem Township in Winnebago County. I have been in this office for about 17, 18 years, and I'm just beginning my second term as the assessor, as I was elected in 2000.
All right, awesome. Thanks. One thing John did not mention is he has just recently helped us write one of our new courses that we're about ready to launch, our residential data collection course, which is going to be specifically available online. So we're doing a test run of it next month, and then hopefully we'll get that added to our schedule. So yeah, John and I have been working very closely on that. Mark helped us write the farm buildings course that we offered brand new last year. So and Andy, I know we haven't worked together a whole lot, but I'm really happy to have you here and getting you more involved with sharing your master wisdom since you hold the CIAOM. So very glad to have all of you here. So I am going to start this off by having Mark kind of discuss a little bit, what are we even talking about? What is the quad year? What is the general reassessment? What does the tax code say?
Okay, so general assessment is also referred to as the quad year. Actually, for the most part, we're talking about two different forms of assessment government. That would be the township form and the commission form. Actually, commission form started before the township did. It started in 1994 and has been going every 4 years since then. So you commission forms of government, you just finished your quad in 2022. Those of us with township, we started ours in 1995 and we're having ours this year. I believe there's still, 17 commission forms of government still. Adrian, is that correct? Never mind.
I think you're right on that.
I had to double mute.
Oh.
I had to double mute going on. Yes, there are 17 commission counties.
Okay, I thought there was, but I didn't know if there'd been any changes. Now there's
that's
two.
still the same.
Okay.
Are there any of you guys here that are from a commission county? Anybody in this group today, or are most of you from township counties? You could put in the chat or whatnot if you're from the commission county. I'm just curious. I actually, pulling up the statute this week and this past week putting the webinar together, I had no idea that commission counties and township counties were on different schedules. So that was news to me. So yeah, that it's a year off. So it looks like we got a couple township folks. I'm gonna guess, 17 out of 102 are commission counties. So I'm gonna guess the vast majority of you are townships. So
most of the commission ones are in Southern Illinois, down towards the tip.
Yeah.
If you look at that first sentence, it says except it's provided in sections 9-220 and 9-225. 9-220 refers to counties that are over 3 million, which obviously the only one is Cook. And in Cook County, they do it differently. They have 3 assessment districts they've divided the county into. And they reassess, or they have their quad year. You can't really call it quad, I guess, but every 3 years. So right now, Township 1 in Cook County started in 1997. They had their most recent one in 2021. Township 2, their most recent one's in 2022, and then Township 3, District 3, was started in 1996, and it is having its township general reassessment this year, 2023. If you look at 9-225, do we have, Adrian, before I even discuss this, do we have any counties that have, so by resolution, they can pass and they can divide their county into 4 assessment districts. And they do a general assessment for each one of those districts in and they stagger those they started back in 1992 and went through 1995. Do we have any of those?
We have the majority of the states in quarter quad reassessment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it looks like we got Tracy and Glinda in the chat, might be on that schedule, it looks
Okay,
like.
so there's a lot of them there. All right. So let's start back in 1992 with District 1. District 2 was 1993, 3 was 1994, and 4 was 1995. The 4th district is the one that's doing their quad this year. And I think one of the advantages of that, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the advantages of that would be, and I was going to talk a little bit about that later, is the fact that you keep your costs pretty consistent from year to year then as to your publication cost. Because for me this year, my publication cost jumps dramatically.
Yeah. All right, so we've talked about when the quad year is and some of the differences in schedules. We're going to look at one more statute here. What is it?
Okay, so what happens is in this year now for us, by June 1st, we are to have visited every property in the county. And if you look at the bold print there, it says, shall actually view and determine as nearly as practicable the value of the property for taxation as it stood January 1st. Except for provisions, section 9180. 9180 talks about the fact for new property. Some of you probably prorate new, let's say that a new home, you're notified of a new home that was just completed in August of this year. So that applies to those. It wasn't there January 1st, but it is there now. So you can potentially prorate that for this year, pick it up still after June 1 and have it valued for this year. Others of you may say, I only look at property as of January 1, regardless of when it was completed. I'm not picking up till the following January 1. That's what they do in my county. The other sections we're talking about there, and we're assessing everything at 33 1/3%, again, except if you're in Cook County, which that's what it refers to down there when it says section 4 of Article 9. That is where it was determined that you could, if you were over 200,000 population, you can use a different form of assessment than 33 1/3. Take your lowest one, which in Cook County is 10%, and then your highest one can't be more than 2.5 times that. So their commercial is 25%. They are the only one that chose to do that, even though there's 9 other counties currently that are over 200,000 population. It also talks there about the fact that you don't use 33 1/3 for sections 10-110 through 10-140. That's referring to farmland, and obviously it has its own form of assessment. And then the 10-170 through 10-200 is for coal.
All right. And that last sentence there, that it talks
I'm
about the
sorry.
assessment
Yes.
books there too.
Correct. You have 3 columns. The first one is for the land. They say property, it's for the land. The second column you would create would be for the structures, and then the final column is total.
All right, sounds good. So in here, it mentions that the assessor or the deputy must actually view and determine as near as practicable. That's a hard word there. The value of each property. So I know a couple of you here on our panel. John, I'm going to have you first. You're part of a larger township. So how are all of the properties reassessed in one calendar year for you?
Well, the deputies are out looking at properties. Not only that, we do use the GIS system quite frequently to looking at building permits, new construction. I don't know if it's actually possible to get out and look at every single property, between each and every quad year. We do the best that we can with viewing. Going out with, like I said, with the deputies, we map out neighborhoods, new construction, building permits, and we do the best that we can from year to year and make notes and go from there.
It sounds like you have a priority list of what properties that you go visit.
Absolutely, absolutely prioritized by new construction, by building permits. And then obviously the properties that haven't had revaluation in a while, or ones where we might see new construction taking place without permits, we'll try to take a look at those areas also.
All right. And then Andy, you had a similar question too. Do you have to inspect each property in person, or do you use the GIS system?
Well, I'm kind of fortunate in my county. We have our GIS set up where they fly our county quarterly. The more populated part of the county is flown quarterly. We get the full county flown every 2 years. So they're able to actually, it's through the near map. So the assessors do have access to that. So they can look at different years and they can compare what's changed in order to make sure they're picking everything up. So it does make it a lot easier. Obviously, you can cover a lot more ground, so to speak, doing that than having to go out in the field and go to each house.
Yeah, for sure. And Mark, what about your jurisdiction? Do you make use of GIS when you're doing the quad year?
Yes, as much spot, we don't get to fly that often. That's nice that you can do that, Andy. Our most recent one was last year, so fortunately we've been able to use the GIS for the most part, but we won't fly again for another couple of years. Oh, it becomes less relevant the further out it gets. But we try to get out as much as possible. Obviously, I have, my assessors do what they can. They're all part-time except for 2 of them. Realistically, they can't get to every property in the quad year. Of course, that's why we have 3 other years to work to make sure we get to all those properties, even if we don't realistically step onto every property in the quad year.
All right. So I'm going to move on to a couple questions more on the valuation side of this. Andy, one of the questions you had provided, is it okay to have properties increase or decrease by different amounts during the quad year?
And I would say yes, that wouldn't be unheard of, depending on what your market data is telling you within a neighborhood or within your jurisdiction. You may have areas that are going up or down by different percentages, and I do say down because it is possible, depending on what the market is showing in a particular neighborhood. So, and it's even possible that you could have 1 or 2 properties within the same neighborhood a decrease and not necessarily increase in a year as well, depending again on what your market is showing and what your uniformity is like.
All right. And then John, I know you wanted to talk about cost manuals a little bit. How often are your cost manuals updated, and do they, I guess, throughout your county, are they varying across townships?
Yes, that is correct. How often the cost manuals are updated is up to the discretion of the assessor, and that's going to vary from township to township, depending on several factors, such as the source of the data for your existing cost tables, dramatic changes in construction costs due to inflation. Since your existing table has been compiled, any budgetary constraints that may inhibit the update. So it just depends from township to township too. And it depends on who you have, if you have a CAMA system, or if you are using the component in place or Marshall and Swift. It all depends on, it's up to the discretion of the assessor, and depending on, their studies that they do, how far off are the cost manuals from the actual sales, the market. So it just depends on the assessor and the office and what their jurisdiction might be too.
All right. And what's your jurisdiction like when it comes to cost manuals?
Well, for our CAMA system, we use the PAMS Pro. And then for industrial commercial, I use the Marshall and Swift. So we try to keep those updated as much as possible. Every year I update the Marshall and Swift, so that should be, and Marshall and Swift is depending on your jurisdiction, Chicago, Rockford, depending on where you live. The construction materials, the labor, everything is going to depend on what part of the state you're in.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I'm going to throw this question to all of you here. Shelley gave me this question a little bit earlier. What part do land values play in the quad? So Mark, I haven't had you talk in a couple minutes, so I'll have you start off with this one.
We actually redid all of our land last year. We try to do it when possible, right before the quad year, so that in the quad year itself, we have all the land just redone.
All right, so you do that a year before, so you kind of do that as kind of prep work to get yourself in good shape for the quad year itself.
It does, and it leaves my assessors free then to focus more on the structures. I basically do all the valuing for the land and then send it out to all the townships, because I want throughout our county, I want all the land to be consistent.
All right. Andy, what about you?
Well, it varies by jurisdiction. Obviously, I don't do any valuation here at my county level. Everything is done by the township assessors. So, it's going to depend on what your sales are showing you as to whether or not you need to adjust those. So that's basically what it comes down to. So, typically you're looking at the whole package when you're doing your valuation. So again, it's going to depend on the neighborhood and on the jurisdiction, really.
Yeah. And John, what do land values, what part do they play in your quad year?
Well, we were fortunate enough to do, not last year, but the year before, we did a land model. So I'm not going to do much with the land for this year. The land model, it was wonderful. We took and separated all the industrial commercial out, and we got our major thoroughfares, the ones that are close to the interstate. Obviously, those are going to be the highest valued. So what we did was we separated out by neighborhood, and then we went ahead and introduced a land model to all the industrial, all the commercial properties, and then based on location towards the interstate. And obviously the areas that are designated for industrial commercial are going to have a little bit higher of a land value than say an industrial property that is out in the middle of nowhere and doesn't belong, it's not uniform with all the rest of the properties, then that would probably be a little bit less. But we've been fortunate enough with the CAMA system to be able to separate everything and put it in a land model, and it's worked out wonderfully so far.
Great. Sounds like you did a lot of work there.
It was a lot of work.
We're about to do
yeah.
a new land valuation class. I might be tapping into you a little bit for as a resource for that
That's
class
fine.
too.
That's
So.
fine too. Yep.
All right. I know some of you had talked about doing the land values ahead of time. What other prep work can be done in the year leading up to the quad to help the process go more smoothly? I'm going to go in the reverse direction. John, I'll put you back on the spot there for that question.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
What kind of prep work can be done in the year leading up to the quad?
Oh boy, all sorts of different prep work when it comes to doing. You can do all sorts of different ratio studies and all the different studies depending on neighborhoods, depending on what's your focus. Okay. The studies from the CAMA system are wonderful, and you can always get help from the supervisor of assessments when it comes to ratio sales. One of my deputies here in the office is also a commercial appraiser, and he gets all the information from the CCAO and he puts it in a spreadsheet for me. Just wonderful amount of data that you can get from spreadsheets, from Office Word, from the CAMA system, essay, all sorts of different areas where you can do the studies and get information to prepare. Many different areas. Yep, many different resources, and also other assessors too. They're always helpful in the same county too.
All right. How have assessors in your county, how closely do you work with them during the quad year?
Well, I try to, especially with the neighboring assessors. One of the discussions that we've had is trying to get together with Rockford, which is to the south, and Roscoe, which is to the north. And we were going to try to discuss on valuation of river properties, because that seems to be an area where we've had an issue. Obviously, since after the flooding, we haven't had flooding in a long time, but the property values since the flood, I think the values have gone way up, but we have not adjusted for those increases since the flooding. I think everybody's been a little bit skittish because spring and winter, you just don't know whether it be the ice jam or how much water is coming. we've been fortunate where the village has taken over a lot of green space and they've purchased a lot of the homes that have had major flooding. So we haven't had to worry about issues with those houses, but we try to work with the other assessors as much as possible in the county. That way we can, I notice you have on here uniformity. Uniformity is one of the most important things when it comes to assessors, is being uniform.
All right, so you're working with your other neighboring townships to make sure, you know, how you're going about those river properties is uniform, and that you're going about
Absolutely.
that in a way
Yep.
that is consistent across not just your own township, but your entire, or at least the neighboring ones as well.
That is correct. And we also have some parcels that we share with Rockford Township. And these happen to be condominiums. So we try to be exactly the same when it comes to the land values when comparing Rockford and Harlem on these properties that share the line.
All right, great. And Andy, I know you mentioned that, you know, your office doesn't necessarily do the valuation piece of it being the county office, but for the quad year, what kind of prep work can you and your office do in the year leading up to the quad year?
Well, basically is I think with providing sales information, providing some that sort of information to the township assessors. I do work a lot with the township assessors up here. I have a good relationship with all of them. They call me whenever they need any kind of information. So I do try and provide the statistical aspect, I suppose you could call it, to them so they can get their stuff together the way they need to.
All right, great. That sounds like that's probably very helpful. And, you know, the fact that you have that ongoing relationship with those township assessors, I'm sure, you know, helps to make that as smooth as possible.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. All right, Mark, same question. What about what can you do in the year leading up to the quad year to help you prepare?
Well, I agree with Andy. I don't do the valuing. Like I said, I did the land valuing or worked with all the assessors to get their land values so they were consistent. But beyond there, that they do that valuing, and those who don't do the valuing, I have someone in my office that takes care of that to make sure there's uniformity there. Because I agree also, I don't remember if it was John or Andy that said uniformity is the key. In my opinion, we don't,
Yes, it is.
we sure don't want people out there talking and, well, how come mine was valued at this, but yours is valued down here? That's a whole lot worse than having a little bit of inconsistency in market values. I really like to focus on the uniformity. I also, the year before in our assessors meeting, we spend more time discussing what their, I don't want to say, how should I say this? What their job's going to be in the quad year. We'll spend that year before working on what they're going to do, what areas they're going to focus on. Maybe as one of you said earlier, maybe there's an area that they haven't really seen in a while. They didn't feel like there was any real change, and it's time for them to go back there. So we spend a lot of time in the assessors meeting talking about that so that come January 1st, they're ready to go.
All right. So, in addition to some of what had already been mentioned, you're kind of putting together, helping your township assessors put together their plan
Yes,
of what properties to visit and what to prioritize and that sort of thing ahead of time too.
correct.
One other thing you're probably working on ahead of time, Mark, you wanted to talk about how the quad year impacts your annual budget. I'm sure that's something you got to think about before you hit the quad year itself too.
Right. For those of us who haven't divided up into 4 districts, the quad year really hits us. So I got some of my past numbers. In the off years, typically I'll spend anywhere from 9 to maybe 12,000 at the most. That's for my newspaper publishing and for my mailing costs. In the quad year, it's right at $45,000 for that. And the first time after I got elected and found out that I didn't know all this, and my budget was struggling because of the fact I got hit with that. So I would suggest that you pay attention to when your quad comes, if you are like me and you do the quad year every 4 years.
What are the biggest increases? What are you using those biggest increases for?
Well, it's a combination. You have to mail to every parcel. So I've got 35,000 mailings going out. And I use a company now to do that, which has really helped my mailing costs. But obviously, newspaper publishing, until the legislature changes, which I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, it'd be nice if we didn't have to publish anymore since it's on the internet. But we do have to. So the major cost is the newspaper itself, which we don't have a choice, but mailing is probably a third of the cost, and then the newspaper publishing is the rest of it.
Okay. And John, being of a township office, how does budget, how does the quad year impact your budget?
Not as much as the supervisor of assessments would. Obviously, we don't have the publishing amount that they do. I don't know if my numbers are exactly correct, but I believe I've heard in the past that I think Winnebago County spends over 200,000 just in publication for the quadrennial year. Yeah, so it doesn't affect the assessors as much. I did mention earlier, we did have that flood back in 2008, and the law required us to send certified mail. So we had to send, I don't remember exactly how many envelopes we sent, but sending, it was a few hundred envelopes. Certified mail cost us $2,000. And normally in a small office or smaller office such as mine, I wouldn't budget $2,000 for sending letters out. You know, that's pretty excessive, but I would strongly urge, you know, somebody that might have river or that might have a natural disaster to put money aside in their budget for something for an emergency such as that. But I don't think that the quad really affects the smaller offices as much. The only thing I could think of is they might pick up a couple more staff for viewing, something like that. Maybe a little bit more in office supplies, but not as much as the supervisor of assessments.
Okay. All right, Andy, anything else that you want to add to the budget conversation?
No, I think they've pretty much covered it.
Okay, I know we had both county and township in that, and so I just thought I'd give you that opportunity if you had anything else you wanted to add. Since we talked about, Mark, with your answer, I'm gonna have to read this one verbatim that you gave me.
Oh,
About the preamble. You also mentioned, you know, how expensive it is to publish in the paper, and it is critical that your preamble and parcel listing meets the requirements of IDOR, so it doesn't have to be corrected and printed a second time. I don't know if that was a personal experience or a story you've heard from somewhere else, but what can you do to make sure that doesn't happen?
this is where I am so glad we have IDOR, because I never had it happen to me, but the reason I didn't was it was always preached to us, please, please, please use the format that is set up by Illinois Department of Revenue. And they sent the most recent one out back in 2021, but it specifically tells you, you know, it gives you an outline for the preamble. It's very specific language. I copy this word for word. I would encourage you, there's nothing worse than publishing and then finding out that it's wrong and you have to redo it. And I don't remember if it was Adrian that talked to us about that, or maybe it was one of the other people up there, but I went when I first became an SA and heard this. And just the fact that if you will just send it to them, they will proof it for you. So every year I send it no matter what. Last year I sent it, and I even wrote down, I think, when I sent that. I don't know, I got this mess. I sent it. Within 2 days, Sheila Woodrum up there had reviewed it, sent back to me and said, Mark, it's fine, you're ready to go. Then I know I don't have to worry about it. And I would encourage anyone, if you haven't seen this circular, you need to get this before you do your quad. Well, before you do any publishing in any year, I would encourage you to use this because it is very well written. It talks about every facet of it, and you can make sure then that you're not going to get that dreaded notice from IDOR that you messed this up and have to redo it. By the way, too, now you have to send a copy of the actual newspaper print showing your publication. You have to send that now to IDOR.
Okay, so it sounds like you've got a good process in place where you have multiple eyes checking it and you're following what has been provided to you to make sure it's done correctly that first time.
Yes.
I could, given how much you guys have mentioned, that publishing costs, that sounds like that's very important to get right the first time. So you're not having your budget go even more haywire there for sure.